Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Mastering Blueforce Weekly Series webinar. Today's topic will be on exploring the Blueforce Employee Module. And actually, with so much information as we put together this particular webinar, that we decided to go ahead and put it into two sessions. So today we'll be going through part one, and we'll continue with this part two next week for our weekly webinars. Now, as we do with all of our webinars, we currently have everyone muted. So please do me a favor, if you have any questions or concerns during today's call, please type them into the questions area of the control panel there, and they'll be addressed at the appropriate time. Now, just a quick reminder that these Mastering Blueforce series are designed to provide all of us, all the users, the knowledge and critical tools needed to easily and efficiently master the Blueforce system. Now, until further notice, we'll be doing these at 2 p.m. every Tuesday and Thursday, so make sure that all of your team is aware and is able to attend. And as always, we do record these, and I do post them on YouTube and on our Gateway intranet site, as well as provide documentation via Gateway and Google Drive as well. So you have access to quite a bit of different pieces of information that will be beneficial to you. Now, especially with today's webinar, there will be a lot of documentation that will be posted out on the Gateway and Google Drive site following today's session. And I went ahead and put the links in here for your future reference when you download the first document. Now, let's go ahead and get started. So, as I mentioned, we have so much to cover as far as a lot of information as far as exploring the employee module in Blueforce that before we actually get into the employee module itself, I think it's best that we go ahead and address basically the topic of how do we get the information into Blueforce to start with. So kind of for today's webinar, I want to cover a couple key parts. And first off, like I mentioned, the webinar is broken out into two parts. Part one will be today, and part two will be this week, and part two will be next week. But we'll want to focus on the JDE to ePay interface, kind of show you the general process and kind of explain a few of the key entry fields that go along with that process. Now, that'll be just a few slides that kind of get the JDE users that on this phone call involved, and they can kind of get that understanding of the process down. And then we'll switch over into Blueforce, and we'll talk about managing the employee profile, and we'll focus on 3 of 8 different tabs that are out there, 7 of which you have access to edit. So we'll focus on 3 of those tabs today. We'll focus on the rates and compensation tab, the working jobs tab, as well as the default shift and task tab. And these are pretty much, I would think, the 3 most important tabs of the employee profile. So we're going to get right into that today. So let's get started. The first section, obviously, of our webinar will be on the JDE to ePay interface. Now, so everyone is on the same page and kind of understands how things work. Blueforce gets that information from JD Edwards, and JD Edwards actually sends the data over to the Blueforce system every 30 minutes. It's basically at the top of the hour, at the bottom of the hour, and it happens daily during the business day. Now, actually, if you go through here, you'll see that you have employees, jobs, and work orders that are sent over every 30 minutes. So once they get over into Blueforce, then you can actually go and access them. You can actually code time to them. You can have employees punch in, punch out. But it's critical that these items are set up correctly in JD Edwards to start with. Now, as I mentioned, I know most of you do not have access to JDE that are on the phone call right now, but many of you do. So I wanted to incorporate this little piece of these next couple slides, 5, 6 slides, just to go through this process so everyone understands. And then we'll get back on the Blueforce road here momentarily. Now, the way the time collection devices work here is the phone-in system, the mobile punch, and the web punch are live systems. That means the minute that the data hits Blueforce, employees can see their information on the mobile punch, web punch, and as well as phone-in. So pretty much those are pretty much live systems. Within 30 minutes of the employee being set up and hired, the employee record become available on those time collection devices. Now, however, the time collection device of the Walter time clock, that is actually based on an individual sync schedule that's set up individually per clock. And each clock can sync up to 12 times a day. If we indeed set up 12 different syncs. Now, the way this works is every time that scheduled sync comes around or someone presses the sync button on the clock itself, the system will then go out, pull down any updates, pull down any changes that may have been to jobs or to new employees or anything like that, and actually make them available at the clock at that point. So the bottom line there is the Walter time clocks have a small delay in getting that information to them. And often it can be as little as 30 minutes from the time the JDE to ePay interface runs, or it could be a couple hours, just depending on that sync schedule that's set up on that time clock. But once it does sync, that's when that new employee information is now available. Now in JD Edwards itself, the employee record has several required fields that will determine if that employee's record will be available in Blueforce. So in JD Edwards, the employee record has these 8 fields that are noted here as part of the general setup process. Now, you will notice that a couple of those are in red. And the red ones are actually the ones that are the most important here. They're the ones that actually are going to say pass or fail, pretty much, with that interface. So if these fields are being forgotten or left out, and they're also red because these are the ones that are typically forgotten, and it creates a lot of havoc later if we don't get them correctly the first time. But these are the ones that we need to be focused on, the ones here in red. And I'll explain more about these momentarily. But bottom line, there is a field, actually more of a form, on the JDE employee record called the Employee Details form that basically allows you a quick access to these 8 fields to make those quick necessary updates so that ePay can then go ahead and decide if it's going to send that information over to, the interface is going to send that information over to ePay, or more importantly, if that, that's kind of the other information that comes down the road with those key fields, is how does it react in Blueforce. And these 8 fields are all the critical ones, but the 4 that are in red are the ones that are the key ones that are often missed. But nonetheless, how you look at this, if you fail to enter the valid data, or maybe you leave them blank, or bottom line, you don't have the correct information in those fields, it's going to result in that JDE employee record not interfacing and transferring over to ePay. So it's very important that we get these correct from the get-go. Now the employee details window, and just a couple more slides here on JDE. Employee detail window looks exactly like this. So for those that have access to JD Edwards, you can go through there and actually see these are the key fields that are needed to be filled in. Now, a couple of these come in automatically as part of the hiring process. So when you actually start the employee as an applicant, and then as that employee becomes a hired record, etc., some of these fields automatically populate. But they're available here in the employee details window for your review at all times. So you can actually go in here and update and make changes as needed, all from one nice little window. Now, of these, you'll see a couple A through H that are listed there. Let's go through these real quickly. Now, A and B are your district and default working job fields. Now, the district is a 5-digit number assignment for the employee's home district. So, for the example there, the district is 10201. It's company 102 Dallas. The district is 10201. The default working job is a 7-digit job number that is the employee's primary work area. And that essentially means that whatever job number goes there is a default job as you're going to see it in Blueforce. Do not put a district here. Too many times than not, we're entering districts here, and that causes other havoc down the road. Most employees do not get charged at the district level. Most employees are being charged at a physical job site. So the job number there needs to be shown here as the default working job. Now I'll explain a little bit more how this is going to come into play by putting the wrong information. So bottom line, the 7-digit job number goes here. In step C here, job type step is the actual position or the JDE code that we have for the job title that person is actually assigned to. If they are a janitor or a custodian, they're going to fall in as 50126, and that's what you'll see there on my example there on step C. But every job title, every job position HR is loaded in the system has a corresponding code. Now that code pretty much doesn't mean much after it leaves JDE. In Blueforce, we don't care about it, but it does play a big step in the assignment of a task, and I'll explain that here momentarily. D is just a supervisor name. Just go in there and check and make sure the right supervisor reference is there. You'll see the actual supervisor's employee ID or supervisor number there. To the right, you'll see the supervisor name. Now, default task, step E there, is the primary task for that employee. By default, his or her hours in ePay will be coded to this task unless otherwise changed by the employee or the supervisor or the editor, submitter, or approver. The default task is determined by the employee's job title. So if they are a 50126 job type step up there in step C, they should be assigned a default task of custodian. If they are an engineer in JDE, I forget the code offhand, but you will see a default task of engineer as well. So the job type step and the default task should have some type of correlation. And this will come into play a little later in our webinar when we talk about the default shift and task tab on the employee record in Blueforce. So that is step E. Step F is the override task. Now, step F, you will see there on my example there is blank. Now, step F gives the opportunity to override the task if for some reason it's not coming across correctly in that correlation. So, for example, we do have a few tasks that really don't equate to a job title in the system. So, for example, I'm just using it as an example, but say company CEO. You might have that one in the, maybe assign an employee to that. However, there's no corresponding task for Blueforce that says company CEO. So in return, the system is going to give you another default task that thinks that closely matches that particular task. So in this case, if the system had come back with custodian as your default task for the CEO position, then what you would actually do is say, you know what, that's not quite right. I need a different task to show up here. So at this point, you have the opportunity in JDE to override the task that is set up as a default task for the employee. Now, once again, only those that have access to JDE will be able to see this particular screen and be able to do these changes. So I would kind of dig out and find out who is that person who's been the chosen one, I guess you can say, that has access to the payroll information for your site. G is assignment type. Now, this one's another critical field in that the assignment type drives what and the number of jobs and the employee that actually will be populated over to the employee's working job tab. Now, I'll talk about that here momentarily when we talk about the Blueforce screen and whatnot, but one of the tabs there is the working jobs. The working jobs allows the system to allow the employee to basically punch in and punch out of certain jobs. This assignment type will drive that. Now, the assignment types that are available for you, an example here that I have in the screen is step G, is job. And that job assignment type right now is basically saying that if that employee gets passed over to Blueforce, which it's going to take the employee's default job, which is in step B above, bring it down over to the assignment type, and you'll see it says job. What that basically means is that employee is a job assignment employee and only can clock into one particular job. Now, that being said, we have other assignment types that are available for you there. We have a district assignment type. If you assign an employee a district assignment type, the employee will then not only get the default job that's listed here, the system is actually going to go in and pull in all the jobs that are related to the home district for that employee. So that employee belongs to District 10201. The system, via the interface, is going to pull in all the jobs and make all the jobs available to that employee that reside under District 10201. And then the last assignment type is area. And area says, you know what, I don't want the job, just the job. I don't want just the district. I want everything in my area. So that means that everything for, in this case, District 10201, the area there is is Area 102, which is the company of Dallas. That means that everything in the Dallas area will be made available for this particular employee. So those are the different assignment types, and it is critical that we get that right, because if we leave that blank, the system says, well, you didn't tell me that you only wanted one job, so I'm going to send you all the jobs. And that often creates too many jobs for that employee to have access to. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I'll go into more detail about working jobs here momentarily. But this is kind of the basis. You kind of understand where all that information is coming from. And then lastly, step H is another field that needs to be filled in. If it's left blank, it can create some havoc. That pay group field drives what pay groups are available for that particular employee. Now, each employee is going to have one default pay group. So in this case, this pay group is assigned to pay group N, which if you remember from last week's webinar, I mentioned that was a non-union pay group with the letter N. If you see a U there, that's a union pay group. But that's the pay group that's going to drive all the rules, the OT rules, the union versus non-union, any holiday rules, and any other pay rules that may be associated. So it's important that we get the pay group right from day one. If for some reason the pay group is incorrect or left blank, well, first off, if it's left blank, the system will say, well, you know what? I don't know what pay group this employee is going to belong to, so I'm going to wait to see what the first job this employee actually punches into and take that job's default pay group. So sometimes that's correct, sometimes it's not. In this case of Dallas, Dallas is an office that's fairly simple in the way it's set up because we only have one pay group. So in that case, it's not going to go. Nothing's going to go wrong there. But in a case like up in New York, where we have multiple pay groups, we have unions and non-union pay groups. Some of those offices have 6, 7, 8 different pay groups to work with. That could be detrimental for the employee's pay because now the system doesn't know which pay group to assign. It assigns the wrong one, and then we're going down the wrong road here. So it's important that we get this pay group filled in and correct the first time around. And one more field just for the JDE users in the call. It's just to explain to you that all of you right now have access to an employee exception report. And for those that are on the phone call, I urge you to run this, and run this once a week, just to go out there and check, if not more times in a week. But you should be running this to actually identify the employee records that are missing the necessary fields needed for ePay. Those necessary fields, as I mentioned, were the default task, default working job, the assignment type, and the pay group. If an employee appears on this report and is missing those pieces of information, that should be a telltale sign right there that that employee A is not in Blueforce. The system has not accepted it over in Blueforce yet. And B, it's going to lead to other issues now. The employee's not punching in. We don't know. Hopefully someone's keeping track of their time. All that good stuff starts happening. So this is a report that I urge all your JDE users on the phone call to be running, if not at least once a week, if not more. And that was kind of, I just want to briefly go to give you a quick intro into the JDE realm a little bit so you can kind of understand how JDE is working. And once the record is in a higher state for that employee, obviously if they're hired, you want them to be correct in the system. But we actually start a little bit further back. If the employee is in an initiate hire status, basically with a status that you're hiring them, but you're kind of waiting a background check, or maybe you're waiting a couple pieces of information, initiate hire status will automatically trigger this interface. So if they're initiate hire or hired, they need to make sure all of the fields are correct, and as you know, the system is already picking that record up as part of the daily, every 30-minute feed, sorry. Alrighty, so let's switch tunes just a little bit from JDE. Now that our employee record has been hired and we've filled in all the cool fields that we needed to, those required fields, and now there will be that record's available over in Blueforce. So now it's in Blueforce, we can now manage the employee profile. Now the employee profile is really just, I guess it's so powerful, it's actually a whole module right behind the whole employee. And I want to stress before we even get started in this that since our employees are our ISS's greatest asset, we want to retain them and want to actually make them feel like they're part of the integral part of the company's mission. So in saying that, let's make ePay work for them on day one. And there's, like I said, basic little things that we can do to make sure that they have access when they first get to the job site. For those that are Walter Clock users, you know that you can register an employee if, accurately, I guess you would say, without them being in the system. Same with the phoning users. You can't have them punch in and punch out unless they're in the system. So let's get that information right from day one. So getting started here, we're going to go to the Employees module. And from the main screen, took a screenshot of my particular desktop, and I have a couple different icons there. But right there, everyone has the employee icon on the far left-hand side. When you click on that, it's going to take you into the employee module, and the first thing you'll get to is a list of all your employees. Now, the list of employees here becomes very important because the list here is going to show you your employees based on a selected job if you've already selected a job to work with. Now, in my example here on the left-hand side, I've already actually selected a job to work with. This happens to be the Diocese of Sioux City. And this particular job, as you see at the top of the screen, has 36 total employees. Now, what the question always comes up is, well, I have this job, but I only have 15 employees. Why is it showing me 36? Well, the reason is because of that tab I mentioned briefly a little while ago, called Working Jobs. If we assign an employee to a job and basically give them access to punch in and out of a certain job, they're going to appear on this particular employee list. So this is perfectly normal. So you may see a little bit extra employees there. And that's just because that employee has maybe too many working jobs. And we can quickly correct that. And I'll show you that here a little bit later in our webinar. But as part of this particular employee list as well, you also have access to all of their pay groups. So keep in mind that you can actually go in here and see all the different pay groups that are available for your particular employees. Now notice here that you see a good, consistent list of pay groups. Everything looks good, everything looks good, everything looks good, and boom, you got a different pay group. Now, one thing I will say is that pay group right there is a union pay group versus a non-union pay group. So the question becomes, if you've already selected one particular job on the far left-hand side, is that job a union job or a non-union job or mixed? If it's not a mixed job, then you have a problem with that particular list because that employee either A, might be on the wrong pay group, or B, maybe his default pay group is that because he works at a different job site as well. A couple of different things to keep in mind, but bottom line, pay attention and be familiar as to where those employees should be assigned to. And then also on the far right-hand side, if you have access, if you're a submitter or an approver that has access to the actual pay rates, you'll actually see all the nice little pay rates right here in this particular blank field. And that's standard rate. I purposely blocked them out for everyone's view for this particular session, but you will actually see that particular column if you had pay rate access. So just a kind of quick general intro to the employee list there. At any point, you can actually go in here and actually click on any of these particular employees and actually go in and actually see the information about them. So if I go in here and click on any of the employee names or the employee numbers, and it's actually any of those little links that you see there, it's all going to take it to the employee profile. So just keep in mind that all the little links you see on here, these little links that are under highlighting or underlining all the names and numbers, will take you straight into the employee profile. Now on the far right-hand side, you'll also see that you have a column called fingerprint. Now this fingerprint column allows you not only to see yes or no under there, but the important part of that is if it says no, that's letting you know that no fingerprint has been registered for that particular employee. And it becomes important because if the first employee, which is Lynette Howell on the list, if she is using a time clock and it says no to fingerprint, that's letting you know that she does not have a fingerprint and she's going to be having some invalid punches that's going to be affecting that invalid punch score. So it's important that you go in there, register a fingerprint. The system will then come up here and update this list automatically for you, and it'll change to a yes. So on my screenshot here, none of these employees, this site happens to be a phone-in site, but none of these employees are set up to use any of the actual time clocks since they've never been registered. All right. So kind of going through for today's session, and as I mentioned, we're going to divide today's session into two parts. There's so much information on the employee record that I don't want to rush to cram everything into one session that we'll go and break it up into part one today, and then next week we'll do part two. So in part one here, we're going to focus on those first three tabs. Those first three tabs are the rates and compensation tab, the working job tab, and the default shift and task tab. And once again, to get to the screen, from that employee list window that was just at, click on the actual employee number or employee name. It'll actually take you straight to this particular screen. Now, once you are in this particular screen, notice you only have access to a couple of key fields. So keep in mind that only as an editor, submitter, and approver, you will only be able to access or actually make edits to any of the blue tabs. Now, if you are sorry, I'm going to take that back because only those that have actually payroll access will actually have access to that rates and compensation tab that happens to be blue. So you have to have access to that. If you have payroll access, you'll have access to that tab. Now, everyone will see that tab. It'll always be blue for all editors, submitters, and approvers. The only catch is when you click on that, you won't be able to see any of that. It'll be just a blank tab for everyone else. So kind of going through here, you'll see that you have a lot of the tabs, a lot of information, and a lot of different things that you can actually do in Blueforce. Now, to keep in mind, just to let you know, is that we do not necessarily go through every field in our prior trainings or previous trainings, just for the simple fact that sometimes it's kind of overkill. You know, we just have so much information we try to share with everyone that we don't get to every piece. So that's why we're going back with these webinars and kind of giving some additional detail. And actually, there was a lot of good suggestions given out in that survey that I sent out on Friday as part of some of our topics and stuff that we want to go forward. So we'll be including all those suggestions and whatnot as well going forward as well. Now, kind of going in here, let's go into our next screen. The next screen here, just so you can kind of see, is you do have a section that's kind of not often talked about, but on the employee profile, you have a little section called the miscellaneous tab. I call it the miscellaneous tab. It's a miscellaneous section. And then that miscellaneous section, you can actually go in there and set a preferred language for an employee. Now, I bring this up because lately we've had a lot of requests for other languages like Spanish, obviously, and French. You have opportunity to go in there and set that for the employee. Now, if you have a Walter time clock and you registered an employee, that is actually a question that is asked of you at the very end of the prompt. You'll be asked to set a default language for the employee. So the employee can set the default language there, and the system will update that information back to the Blueforce employee profile here. Now, if you're in phone-in, mobile punch, or web punch, you don't get that option. So you have the ability here to go ahead and hit the drop-down and set your preferred language. Now, unfortunately, the preferred language doesn't translate right now into mobile punch. However, there are some updates that will be coming up in mobile punch here in the next week or two that we'll share with everybody that will then make that language available on mobile punch as well. But for right now, the preferred language is a setting you can go ahead and set for your employees on the miscellaneous screen. So let's go in our first tab at the bottom of the screen. Actually, the tabs are all located at the bottom, and it's called the Rate and Compensation tab. Now, the Rate and Compensation tab, like I mentioned, is going to be a tab where we'll let you see the pay rate for the employee. It also has a section on workers' compensation, which we do not actually use, and we have no immediate plans to use in Blueforce. But the rate information for that employee will be quickly available for you on this tab. So the way the screen will look like will be very similar to this. If you have pay rate access, you're going to see the bottom half of the screen. If you don't have pay rate access, it'll be right at the top. It'll be blank, and it looks kind of funny because it just says workers' compensation here. We have no access. You're just missing a lot of the stuff that comes before the workers' compensation, everything that comes in after that title as well. But it looks similar to the bottom of the screen if you had access. Now, when you have access in there, you have access to seeing the employee's pay rate. You have access to another field called override task rate, which I'll explain here momentarily. But those are really the only two fields that you can really do anything with. Now, the overtime and double time here in the middle of the screen, that really doesn't do anything for you. That allows you to set rules outside the normal overtime rules that we have set up. Set up pay rates outside the normal overtime rates that we have set up over as part of the overtime rules. So as part of the overtime rules, we tell the system, time and a half after 40 hours in a work week, or time and a half after 8 hours in a day. We set all that up for you, so there's no need to go in here and be concerned that overtime or double time is blank. The only time these come into play is if we were to pay a higher overtime rate. So maybe we pay time and 3/4, I don't know, overtime for this particular job. Then we could go in here and adjust that. But for all technical purposes, we really shouldn't be touching any of the rates because the rates come straight from J.D. Edwards. So J.D. Edwards drives all this information for us initially. So as I mentioned, the pay rate field is something you do not want to touch. Do not edit. Leave it alone. We do not want the two systems in sync. JDE sends the rate to Blueforce and knows that the rate has applied in Blueforce. unless there's a change in J.D. Edwards, that rate will not be sent again for that particular employee record. So if you go in here and mess with it and it's out of sync when it comes to payroll time, we're going to see a lot of discrepancies and a lot of issues, and payroll, our corporate payroll team is probably going to be a little concerned about it and reach out to you guys. The override task rate checkbox that's available there allows you to go ahead and incorporate another level of rates. Too many times around the country, we realize that, you know, a custodian might get paid $10 an hour. That's the normal pay rate. But for this particular job, they may get paid $15 an hour. In that case, we can go to that particular job, go to the task of custodian at the job level, and set up a task rule at the task level, meaning that if the requirement for job A is that all window cleaners, in my example here, get paid $15 an hour, then the employees working this task will get paid $15 instead of the normal rate that is shown there in the pay rate field on the employee profile. So if we choose no, the system is always going to go based on the task rate, if there is one. If there isn't a task rate, then the pay rate here of $10 will take precedence. Now, if we say yes here, the system says, I don't care what the task rate is, whatever, I don't care what the task rate is set up as. I always want to pay the employee their pay rate. What that means is this is a $10 employee all day, 24/7, doesn't matter what they do, what they work, all that good stuff, they always get paid that pay rate. So that is something that is available and something that I think is very important that we look at. So this is one of the options for those that are making rate changes out there that have a poor rate change score when it comes to the compliance. This is one of the things that the ePay team will stress from immediately, is to set up your tasks with the specific rates, or there's some other options, but this is one of the big ones. The billable and bill rates. Those, I go ahead and note it here, it's some functionality that we can use now, but we have not used it because it simply does not interface to J.D. Edwards. So that's something that's on the project plan that will be brought in later in 2017. But you can actually see that you have a place where you can actually put in bill rates and determine if it's billable or not. So that's something that's very big in our company right now, and something that we're going to incorporate into the coding of time, per se, going forward. All right, the next tab is the Working Jobs tab. Now, the Working Jobs tab is one I've been mentioning a little bit already a couple times. This is the most powerful tab of all the different tabs that are available, even more powerful than the pay rate, because this controls what jobs the employee can punch in and out of. So the Working Jobs tab is available to all editors, submitters, and approvers. So everyone on this phone call can go into that particular tab, can go in there and adjust the working jobs as needed for the employee. Like I mentioned, the Working Jobs tab is important because it controls what assigned jobs that employee can punch into. Now, these jobs that are appearing on the screen on the Assigned Jobs section all come in initially from J.D. Edwards. This is the assignment type. Once again, if we had told the system assignment type of job in J.D. Edwards, the system is only going to send one job. So what I'll show you in a little bit is this employee's default job is on 100-My Main Office. So if we had set this employee up as a job assignment type, the system would only pull in one job and make only that one job available for this employee to punch into. Since we decided to do district assignment type, the system will then pull in everything that's within that particular district and make that available. And once again, as I mentioned earlier, if we had selected area there, the system would say, you know what, I don't want just one job, I don't want just a handful of jobs, I want all jobs that are part of that area. So you can kind of see quickly how this can either be a benefit or truly quickly make a mess out of things. Now, for those, as I mentioned earlier, we never put a district as the default job, because if you do that, the employee will be able to punch in at the district level. What that often does, it skews our reporting for one, but it skews kind of our coding and labor, because we're having labor go into a district level when it actually should go down to the job level. The only employees really, and there's a few exceptions for the IFS team that are on here, but the only time the labor should go to a job level is kind of from an admin level. So your administrative team stuff that maybe those employees that maybe some of us on the phone call here really are the only ones that maybe would go at a district level. Everyone else should be at a specific job site as a default job. So as you go through here, you'll notice, there are some times where employees, as I mentioned a while ago on the employee list, you're looking at that, you'll see there are employees that don't belong to your account. And it's all because of this particular working jobs tab. So if you go to that employee's record, the one thing that becomes a little hairy sometimes there is that the employees sometimes when you go in here, you may see that you have all these jobs, and maybe job 50, basically some of the jobs that the employee can actually work at are not in your area of access. And sometimes that makes it a little difficult for you to adjust as well. And we'll go through that here momentarily, but these jobs that appear in assigned jobs are the jobs that the employee can actually punch in and out of. So kind of keeping that in mind is that you actually have the right-hand side there to always see the actual jobs that are assigned. Now, the left-hand side of the screen is where you can actually go through and kind of determine if you need to add jobs. You can go through here and search for any unassigned jobs by job number, by job name, and I put those in red because those are the ones you typically use. But you can also search by address, export category, which is the district, the city, state, or zip. Now, in that search area, you can hit the little drop-down where to select and pick job number. Key in the job number in the field to the right, and once you do that, you kind of do these two fields, click on Go, and the system will actually list all the jobs that match the criteria based on your search selection. Once you've done that, you then have the ability to then go forward and add those jobs over to the right-hand side. And that means you pick the job you want, hit assign, and that job number will then now appear under the employee's assigned jobs. Now the employees then are able to punch in and out to any of those assigned jobs, and this is instantaneous. So the minute you hit save, assign it, and there's a little save button on the bottom of the screen. The employee can go to the phone, immediately punch in there. If you go to a clock, you can sync that clock and make that employee available on that clock now based on that job addition. A couple different things like that, but this is all instantaneous. Now, the flip side is you can always remove the jobs that you need. So if you go on here, you notice that you have 7 different jobs the employee can punch into, but you only want them to have access to the My Main Office job and the U.S. Airways hangar job on my example here. Then you simply click on the job that you want to remove, click on Remove in the middle of the screen. It'll move it back to the left-hand side. And then obviously now they are not available for that employee anymore once you hit Save. So what you've done is essentially keep in mind that the minute you go in there and remove, that job will also be removed from the employee's availability, so the employee can no longer punch into that job. And the question that always comes up here is, is it a bad thing that an employee has 20 different jobs to punch into? No, it's not a bad thing. However, just keep in mind that the working jobs there simply make it convenient for the employee to be able to punch into multiple job sites. If it's a route employee that's going around to 20 different jobs a night or 20 different jobs in a week, then it makes sense to have all 20 there. If it's a job if it's an employee that's only going to work one job all the time and never will deviate from that, then there's no reason to have 20, 40, 50, 100 different jobs available for them. So at that point, go back to JDE, fix that assignment type, but in the meantime, you can go in here and remove the jobs and clean that up. So it keeps the confusion, keeps the possibility of the employee punching into the wrong job. Now, when I say that, you're probably thinking, okay, well, I thought the employee could only clock into one job. If they're set up at a job site where they have a time clock, and that time clock has 5 different jobs assigned to it, that gives the ability for any employees who are part of one or all 5 of those jobs to access that clock. So you can quickly see that if that employee has access to all 5 jobs on that time clock, the employee, when they punch in, can pick any of those 5 jobs, which could cause some issues on where their labor goes, et cetera, et cetera. So you got a lot of problems with that. Same thing with phone in. If the phone number they're calling in from is not linked, like it should be, to a specific job number, then if the employee were to know the other job numbers that they typically would work on a given day, they can go in there and key in those job numbers, and the system will accept that because, once again, the system is prompting them to enter a job number. So the less jobs that we can actually make available for the employees is often sometimes better in that case. So just keep in mind that working jobs controls what jobs the employees can actually punch in and out of. Now, often you will see that some of those jobs that are available down there are also their employee's default site. Well, in those cases, the employee you cannot fix that for the employee, because if you try to remove the working job, the system will let you, but it'll consistently give you an error saying need to select a default site. Well, part of your access here as an editor, submitter, and approver is that you do not have access to the default site. So the only way to correct that is to really go back to your JDE representative, whether it be yourself or someone there at your office. Let them know that the default site for that particular employee in JDE needs to be XYZ job. At that point, within the next 30 minutes, during that interface, once it's corrected, it'll actually go through and update this for you, at which point you can go back to the record in Blueforce and make the correction to the correct default site. So just keep that in mind. More times than not, the problem is that the employee was simply set up incorrectly, or maybe transferred to another default job, another job site, and never had their default job site information corrected. Sometimes, once again, they're simply aren't your employees. And a lot of these fields are locked out because of our access, and we don't want everyone going in there and making changes left and right without really going back to the system of record, which is JDE. So just keep in mind, if for some reason something needs to be changed, we need to get that corrected in JD Edwards. Once again, the employee details form is where we do this, and then we go there and fix those necessary fields: the default task, default working job, the assignment type, and even the pay group. Now, the pay group is the one thing I will address, and it's not really directly related to the working job, but the pay group, once again, as I mentioned on last week's webinar, that only updates at the start of a pay week. So it's important that we get that right the first time. Otherwise, we run the risk of paying the employee incorrectly. We run the risk of a lot of the rules not running right. A lot of things could happen. So all four fields are all important, but it's important that we start in JD Edwards. All right. So the next tab is our Employee Default Shift and Task tab. Now, the default shift and task, as I've mentioned a little bit, sort of in the very beginning of the call, the default shift is really just a label, but more so the default shift is really what is the employee's grouping, or what is the employee working, what time of day do they work. And all the employees that are assigned a specific shift are essentially grouped together. So you can go through here at any point and kind of see the different shifts, but more so the shifts actually play a bit more in that there's rules and stuff that apply to them, and I'll go into more detail momentarily on that. Now, the task, on the other hand, the task is important because the task tells us and tells Blueforce, what did the employee work? The employee worked a custodian, or they worked a window cleaner, they were a guard, they were an engineer. What did they do? And a lot of our reporting these days are actually based on positions. You can quickly go into the system, especially in the timesheet view, and see all the different positions of your jobs and see kind of they're broken out by tasks. So it comes into play from that perspective. But bottom line, the question is, what is a task? And the tasks are just simply positions or job duties. So once again, the custodian task, the engineer task, the elevator starter task. There's a whole bunch of different ones in the system. I won't list them all, but there's plenty of them in there. I'll say several hundred different tasks that are available just depending on what the employee's job duties are, and it's all based on the type of job, and I'll explain that momentarily. But the task drives the geocoding. It really basically tells us if it's a supervision task that goes to one set of codes, or a non-supervision task that goes to a different set of codes. So the tasks are determined in JDE based on the task model that's set up for that particular job record. So when we go through the process of setting up jobs, the job record is set up with specific task model, and that's kind of going through the job master staging setup kind of process that we have in place. And that job master staging setup process is kind of driven by those specific users or admins that are out in the field that have access to JDE as well. So as you go through there is a task model, and it's hard to see. It's kind of small, but the bottom of the screen there shows you a task model of this job that's set up as a cleaning task model. That means that all cleaning-related tasks will be available for this job, and obviously, as a consequence, will be available to all of the employees to punch in and out of. Now, if this job is really an engineering job, and we set up as a cleaning job, then obviously the whole wrong set of tasks will be available for those employees. So it becomes very important that when we set up jobs, that we set it up properly with the correct task model. Now, each job has a list of tasks that an employee can work, and each employee has a default task. As I mentioned a while ago, on the employee detail screen in JDE, the employee's default task, hopefully it's correct, is pulling off of that particular job type step that's available for them in JDE. Now, like I said, the default task, the override task can be used to change the default task in the employee detail screen. What that is saying is that, for example, once again, as I mentioned earlier, if we had a CEO was the job type step, and the default task associated with that was simply custodian, and we know that was incorrect, we could actually override it using that override task field. Now, the override task really doesn't play as much of a role here just yet, because coming out of JDE, you may not know what that employee may be working from day one, but you have the ability always to go back to the employee detail screen and get that updated. Now, once that information is over in Blueforce, the system Blueforce is going to try to now match that task, which is the default task of custodian, in this particular example, with all the different jobs that he or she may be working with. Now, So if that employee is set to work a job, an engineering classified job, and the default task is custodian, system is going to try to push custodian down to that engineering job. And we're going to quickly find out that the engineering job has no cleaning tasks, which means no custodian tasks. So the system is going to match as best it can in Blueforce with a alternative task. And sometimes that is correct, and sometimes that is, more times than that, is incorrect. And that is because either A, the employee was set up incorrectly initially, or with the improper job type step and the task, or B, that job was set up incorrectly. So that's why most times around the country we always get the question of, why are the tasks run in Blueforce? Where's that coming from? Well, it's because either A, like I said, the employee was set up incorrectly, so that's why we'll start first, or B, the job was set up incorrectly. So it plays a difference. It makes a big difference. So we'll go through some examples here momentarily of those. But those are the two parts that I would tell you to start when trying to figure out what went wrong. Another question is, why do I always have to select from a long list of tasks? I'm on the phone and it's taking me 5 minutes to listen to all the different tasks that are out there. I've heard it all, because sometimes if you use phone in, mobile punch, and web punch, you have to just kind of scroll through or listen to on the phone, unfortunately, all the different tasks that are available. Now, what we make it available for you on phone in for phone users is that the first option is accept your default task, or you can select it from the list of tasks. So the employee has a quick option. Typically, I say press 1, be done with it, take your default task. However, if you choose to listen to all the tasks that are part of that task model that are available for that job will be read to you on the phone. So if you have 20 different tasks, guess what? You listen to 20 different tasks. Actually, this is just 5 tasks. Then you hit next, go to the next 5, go to the next 5, and hopefully you find the one you want. Otherwise, you got to listen to it all again and try it again. And it takes a while. It takes a lot from the clock-in process. I'll tell you, it takes a while to do that. Now, this long list of tasks is not needed for the Walter time clocks, because the Walter time clocks, most of them are set up to auto task, which means that the system automatically goes and sets the default task for the employee based on the default task that's set up in Blueforce for them. So it doesn't ask them or prompt them for that, it just does it for them. If there are too many tasks, and I want to stress this to everyone, I can't stress it enough. If there are too many tasks and you notice that the employees are getting too many options when they're using phone and mobile punch or web punch, then I would ask you to review those available tasks and enter a help desk ticket for us, and someone on the ePay team will assist you with deactivating those extra tasks or unwanted tasks. Because, for example, who needs an elevator starter? That's a task, it's a real task that we have out there. very limited use. That's a union job, union task, sorry. So we really don't use it. Or who's using a recycling tech? Very few of us. So some of those that are very specific to certain jobs are going to be available to, unfortunately, to everyone based on that task model. So if you have so many tasks that you're not using, maybe you only need the custodian task and a supervisor task, and that's all you need. Get with the ePay team, and either myself, Tiandra, Beth, or Jade will go in there and deactivate some of those tasks for you. That just basically makes one less thing that the employee has to worry about or to hear about when they're trying to punch in and out. So what is the purpose of this tab? Once again, this tab for the default shift, task and shift tab is just it's a place where you can see the employee shift and primary or default task as to every job that they are assigned to work at. You can go through there and, like I mentioned, if it's incorrect or the desired task is not applicable to the job, the Blueforce is actually going to go in there and try to apply a pretty equal task that's out there. Sometimes it's wrong, but you have the ability once again to go in there and edit it, and that's the key thing to keep out of here. Keep in mind here is you can go in there at any point as an editor, submitter, and approver and edit the task that's available on the Blueforce employee record. Now, as I mentioned, and I will say it again, it's best to go and fix it on the JDE side first, and then come in here and update it, because if some way, shape, form in the future an employee update is sent back to Blueforce, it's going to override your change. So always make sure that the right stuff is always on the Blueforce side, on the JDE side first. Now, one of the other purposes of this particular tab, before I go and take you into it, is to keep in mind that it assists with lunch rules. So the default shift is actually where the lunch rules are set. So once again, you may have a shift that has lunches, you may have a shift that doesn't have lunch. It's all driven off of those particular lunch rules. The shift also assists with the different pay differential rules that are out there. So keep in mind that we can set up pay rules or shift rules that only apply to certain shifts. So it's important that an employee that is working or assigned to a certain shift is assigned correctly because of these particular rules that are in play. Treat the shift as nothing more than a label. And I said that a little while ago. Treat it as a label used to group your employees. That's really all it is. So when you go into the default shift, default shift and task tab, have it there backwards there. Default shift and task tab, you're going to be able to edit, and actually you're encouraged to edit the task that has been assigned to the employee for the working jobs he or she has been assigned to. Now, as I mentioned, the task sometimes comes incorrect. So you go in there, you'll see that you'll actually have My Main Office, and right to the left of the job name field, I have the edit link. So if I click on edit, I then have the ability to go in there and correct the employee's default shift, maybe change shifts, or maybe I want to part a different group. Now I'll give you an example. For our some of our offices, we have shifts set up because the night shift may not get a lunch, the day shift does. And the day shift, when they are assigned to a day shift, they're actually going to be applied an hour deduction, whereas the night shift gets no deduction. So it makes it's very important that we assign them to the right default shift here. The next tab, if we we'll go to the next drop down. You have the ability for the default task, which at this point you can go in there and change the task. By default, in my example, the employee, the system thought their default task is window cleaner. However, we need to change it to supervisor. So we just select supervisor, and now it'll update that particular task. In all, once we are done adjusting the task, the system will then go ahead and allow you to save it. And you do that by first clicking update on the line. This is a little confusing because you think if I go down to the bottom and just hit save, I'm good to go. Not quite. You actually have to hit update on that particular line and then go down to the bottom and click 2 for save, or hit the second step there and hit save. That's actually going to update that particular record for you. Now it's important to know that the minute I save or update my default shift and task, the next time the employee punches in, this change goes into effect. Anytime in that pay period, or pay week, sorry, it's going to be based on the information that was already in here. So keep in mind that if the employee was assigned to the wrong default shift, their lunch rules, any other rules that may have been applied to the other shift were no longer active. They're going to be now on this new shift. So you may have to go back and adjust make some fixes or corrections to that particular time because the rules were incorrect. However, because we have this thing called reprocessing timesheets, if you remember my discussion from last week's webinar, you can actually go to the timesheet view and reprocess timesheets, because all we're doing is telling the system, these are the rules I want based on this default shift, let me reprocess them. So you have the ability of doing that yourself. Default task. Default task does not automatically update. If the employee was coded to a window cleaner last week and this week he's a supervisor, not this week, but say on Monday he was a Saturday, Sunday, Monday he punched in, he shows up as a window cleaner, and then today on you made a change that he's now a supervisor task, then you're going to have to go back to those 3 days and just basically edit the time card and change the task to the proper task. But going forward, that employee punching in this new change will take effect. Very simple. I encourage all of you to go out to the default shift on the default task tab and make those adjustments as needed. So as I wrap up, just want to stress to you again, support methods. If you need any assistance with anything you saw today or any concerns, put in a help desk ticket for us or call the help desk line there at 210-495-6093, and a help desk ticket will be entered for you. As I mentioned, this was part 1. Next week we'll continue on with part 2 of the employee profile. There's quite a few other pieces to this employee module that we want to address, so that'll be part of next week's webinar, next Tuesday and next Thursday at 2 p.m. Central. Please pass the word on. Let's get all your team members on part of this call, as we always share good and vital information to all of you. So until next week, we'll see you again on part 2 next Tuesday and Thursday.